I don't know why this is new news, but it's been trending the last 24 hours. Latinos, US Latino voters, in particular Latino men, saved the republic by voting for Trump. The election was last November 2024. As of today, it's April 21st, 2025. This is not new news. It's the facts are there, and I just thought it was interesting that these new images have been posting up. So what I hope to do is show you why, and also to go over some feelings within the Chicano community uh, as to why this is a problem as well. So let's hit the first part of it. The first part of it is that this is the thing that's been going around. Latino men in this is really just the electoral votes. It's got nothing to do with Latino men. They just put Latino men, and it shows the electoral votes won by both sides. And you can imagine all the comments ranging from very tribal, racial, topics, comments. It's X doing X, to people having very different opinions on this. Maybe they one there's one sentiment is that I hope they're happy now because they're all being deported. Another sentiment is that, well, Latino men are like white men. So the more that Latino men voted for Trump, the more white they want to be. So they're making this a shame game. The other side that lost. So I find that very interesting. It always surprises me that black people vote overwhelmingly for the party of the KKK and Jim Crow laws. Why would they vote for a party that was formed to abolish slavery? 90% of Latinx men think they're white. I mean, the reactions on these things are wild. Absolutely wild. So I found a recent article, because most of these articles that I found were from November and December. But I found a decent little story on The Conversation, which is pretty much a centered story. Doesn't lean left, it doesn't lean right. I like those articles. I will stop and go and give you guys my thoughts. And I'm going to be as balanced and fair to everyone as possible. Okay? Donald Trump's ability to harness so much of the Latino vote remains one of the more puzzling issues. Latino voters, men in particular, swung decisively towards Trump last November, increasing by 16 points. You heard that right, 16 points from 2016 to 42% of the bloc in 2024. This despite Trump's constant history of antagonistic remarks about Latino immigrants. It also appears to fly in the face of the fact that his policies on tariffs, border militarization, and mass deportation will likely affect Mexico, Panama, and several other Latin American countries. Clearly, Latinos swung towards Trump for the same reasons many other voters did. This is very important. They're unhappy with the economy, particularly inflation. There were also widespread anxiety about the marked increase in immigration at the southern border. So right off the top of this story, they say economy, inflation, and immigration. I wouldn't even think immigration is top 3 to 5 as far as issues for the U.S. Latino voters. What it says to me is that inflation, economy, security, job security, is that they vote not based on the color of their skin. They don't vote based on their ethnicity. It's not the first thing on their mind. That's what I'm getting. But there are profound reasons driving the dramatic shift in the Latino vote. A closer look at some of the historical dynamics that have shaped the Latino electorate gives a clue for the reason behind this seeming paradox. The Latino vote comprises about 14.7% of all eligible U.S. voters, yet it is far from a monolith. It is a heterogeneous group of people who trace their roots to Mexico, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the rest of the 21 speaking Spanish countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. Each of these countries have a different political landscape. We've covered this, right? So yes, it's not a blanket term, Latino. The term itself, Latino, is a blanket term, but we don't vote blanket. Like Latinos vote like this. That paragraph goes about it. Even within these national groups, this is interesting. There are also significant divisions. Partly this is based on a person's time of arrival in the U.S. Aha. Mexican Americans whose families immigrated to California from border cities like Chihuahua and Ciudad Juarez in the early 1940s as seasonal and legal agricultural workers will have different experiences and priorities than Mexicans who arrived more recently from the southern states of Chiapas and Oaxaca and settled in New York City without any legal pathway to citizenship. Let's sit on that for a second. Two things here. The first thing is that they bring up Mexican Americans. Besides Mexicans, now Mexican Americans, now Chicanos, for the last 150 years going on, is that we're not immigrants to this part of the world. And that this part of the world, until very recently, included the Southwest of the United States. We were nomadic, traveling north and south. That has been that indigenous, then Mexican part of these people that moved. It has been documented. It has been heralded. It has been in poetic laments of movies and writers and books that we are not immigrants to this land. That has been a Chicano phenomenon forever. Why? It's because we're treated as that for the longest time. We fought in the wars for America. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, all the way up here to Iraq. Heralded American heroes, getting all the awards, Congressional Medal of Honor, all the honors. Very decorated, very patriotic. Because at times you wanted to prove your patriotism, prove that you were part of America. That is a Chicano experience. So this article is right in that each Latino is different, but nowhere does it say that, listen, we're actually a part of this part of the world. We don't come from another country up until Mexico lost half its country to the States. You can argue, put on your historian mind, all that stuff, but that's what's happening. That's how a lot of Chicanos view it. That's how a lot of Chicanos still view it. That's why you have such a strong subculture of Chicanismo that has been going on for over 150 years. Like it or not. It's part of what I call it's part of the American tapestry that makes us so special. So I find this really fascinating because it's all in play as to how a person votes. Let's go back to. Meanwhile, Nicaraguan American families who arrived in Miami in the 1980s, seeing the Sandinista revolution, will have a different economic outlook from those escaping Daniel Ortega's current dictatorship. There's no such thing as generic Latino voter. Okay, good. Let's go to Latino conservatism. For many decades, Latinos were reliable Democratic voters, and many pundits predicted that they would stay that way, tipping the political scales decisively away from the Republican Party. There's always been a strong strain of Latino conservatives voting Republican. I agree. Religion has also played a key role. The majority of people of Latino heritage are Catholic, but there's a growing population of evangelicals and other Christian denominations, reflecting a growth of those groups in some Latin American countries. Can't argue that. I cannot argue that. In Salvador, for example, the rise of evangelical religions has produced an increasingly culturally conservative population who support the mano dura, strong hand policies of Bukele. A similar trend can be found among Latino communities in the U.S., where Latino evangelicals strongly supported Trump in 2024. I can't argue that. The political history of many Latin American countries is a clue to the makeup for migrants to the U.S. Mexico's Cristol War in the 1920s prompted thousands of Catholics to flee the country's anti-clerical government by migrating northwards. 3 decades later, the Cuban Revolution of the 1959 produced large refugee flow of conservative and anti-communist migrants. Those exiled, most notably Cubans in South Florida, would ally with the Republicans, based on their punitive policies towards Cuba. This helped turn Florida into a Republican stronghold. I mean, I'm not going to argue that. It's pretty blanket. It's pretty general, but they're hitting the general points pretty much correct. More recently, 7 million Venezuelans fled the left-wing government of Maduro. This has led to a more general antipathy, among many Latino voters toward left-wing politics and politicians. Trump's condemnation of Maduro and Venezuelans has endeared him to politically conservative Latino voters of all national backgrounds. Race, class, and immigration. Interesting. It is also clear that some Latino voters are suspicious and resentful of newer waves of migrants. This is really, really key here, guys, particularly recent asylum seekers from Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. This dynamic between earlier arrivals and new immigrants is nothing new in the U.S. Early waves of immigrants and their descendants, such as Irish or Italian immigrants, also adopted nativist attitudes toward their new arrival. In some ways, each generation of immigrants has tried to pull up the bridge to the generation that comes after them. Yet, these negative reactions also relate to racial and class hierarchies, both within and between Latin American countries. Like the U.S., Latin American countries have a long history of racism and color discrimination, as well as a deep class divide with very high rates of income inequality. New immigrants have arrived in recent years from places such as Venezuela, Honduras, Cuba, Nicaragua are poorer than earlier generations of immigrants and often have darker skin. As a result, culture divides may impede a strong sense of solidarity between earlier generations of Latino immigrants and recent ones. This is not to suggest that racism and classism are dominant drivers behind Latino support for Trump, but it may help explain why Trump's campaign comments about recent Latino immigrants are not a deal breaker for every Latino voter. Okay, it talked about being here for a long time as opposed to someone being here recently. It also talked about colorism and discrimination within Latinos. All of that is true. All of that is on point. And that people who can blend in, who can look a little bit more like of lack of better words, American, get treated differently than, let's say, someone who's more indigenous looking, darker looking. That is also true. The thought here, too, is the antagonistic attitudes towards people who have been here longer, i.e. Chicanos, and we talked about what Chicanos are, right? And you take that attitude, take that phenomenon, and apply it to Puerto Ricans and Cubans, all those people that have been here longer than the recent immigrants. Okay, there are their antagonistic attitudes towards each other? Absolutely. Is there a demographic within that hate each other? Absolutely. That exists. Whether it is that you're making us look bad, you're making our people look bad to you got to go through the legal means. My families did it. Why aren't you doing it? All that is in play too. Más moreno. You guys are too dark. There's that too. Now, I'm going to say this also. Recent immigrants, legal or not, they got antagonistic attitudes towards people who've been here for generations that share an ethnicity. Like if they're both of Mexican descent, they will say, "You're not Mexican. You're American. You think you're better than me." That is also in play. take all that, what I just said. Now, how do you think people are going to vote? If times are tough, economy sucks. I told you what they're voting for first. The left are in shock and are upset and are raging over those Latino men who have voted right because they see them as sellouts, vendidos, tío tacos. How can you do this to your raza? How can you turn your back on la raza? I thought you were down for la raza. What happened to you? You hear those sentiments as well. So I'm wondering if those sentiments can be turned around into instead of just shaming our Latino men on why they voted, heaven forbid, as an individual, turn that argument around and show them options. We haven't been paying attention to the Latino community, but here is a new candidate that I think you should pay attention to, that I think who can answer some of your questions, but also too, lead us into another direction. You're not hearing any of that from the left. I'm sorry. All you're hearing is shame game. Whether you vote for Trump or not, that's all you're hearing. That's all I'm hearing. I don't hear solutions. In fact, it's a shame because there are a lot of Latinos who are legal, who are voting, who are very open to a pathway of citizenship for illegals that are here, for undocumented people that are here. It's in the data that they are open to pathways of citizenship. They're not against that. But you're not hearing that from the left because to them, you're a traitor. You're Benedict Arnold. You turn your back on La Raza, I'm telling you. So what's going to be more effective? Shame game? Or you know what? Let's talk about some things where we can connect and compromise. Let's talk about taking the Democratic Party into a new direction. You're not hearing that. And that is going to keep on that divide. And that is why you've seen so many Latino men for all those different. I tend to think it's more for individual economic than it is because they want to be white. That is absolutely absurd. Does that exist? Of course it does. But to blanket comment that generalization, you're completely missing so much. And you're also completely missing on opportunities to win their votes back.